Today we're going to be looking at a block-in and painting application for just this background image. Guys, this was in your folder for this week's assignment for doing a landscape. And I did a couple paintings. This one I recorded. Partially it was done on Monday after Zoom class and in office hours. And then I finished up recording the painting in with my Sony, but I've been having technical issues with it cutting off, so learning curve and all, I just wanted to put it up so you guys had a demo. Additionally, I've sped this up 2 times, so you don't have to watch the whole thing in real time, but it should at least be informative enough about how to do a landscape. So getting started, the first thing you want to do is get a horizontal line, a nice even 0-degree line in this case when there's water, because any slight degree on that horizon line can make the water feel like it's going to fall off the page, unless that's your intention, which I don't think it is. We want to get that horizon line in with the landscape right off the bat. And then the second thing we want to do is start to consider where we're going to put the focal point. And the focal point for me on this painting is it's that line that goes from the orange cloud on the top of the photograph and then through the water, falling into the water, and then to that rock in the foreground. It's hard to see from this angle, but the photograph shows a well, or at least an interestingly lit rock covered in moss. So following the lines of perspective, I'm going to do the waterfall first, kind of build an edge around my rock in the body of water. And I've got the 2 lines that I put in first, and now I'm putting in other perspective lines that kind of look like the edge of a building. In fact, I am sort of architecting this to a recognizable form because that's what it looks like to me. It looks like some of the water runs off into this lower level at that angle that I just drew there, erasing and cleaning it up. And the upper line above it is going to be where the rocks have been eroded from the water falling over a millennia or 10 or whatever, hundreds of thousands of years. And it does look like a building right now. And right there at the corner is going to be a lot of mist and water spray the camera captured in its longer exposure. You take pictures of things, and with a good camera, have the option of deciding the exposure. Really, really fast exposure will capture individual droplets of water, great for sports, and the longer exposure will just show the water falling through time and will give it this kind of smooth effect that we see here. Also, it was darker, so a longer exposure would be needed to capture the light. And I've gotten the rocks on the left-hand side, the rocks in the middle, and the water falling. And now I'm working on some of the value shifts. It just starts with a vertical line for the most part, and then I'm just separating where that light blue, or even just the blue water falling, and the dark brown of the rocks is, so that when I start painting, it's as simple as color by number. Okay, so more of the kind of shapes and breaks in the water, showing the rock formations around it. And it looks like I've got pretty much that background waterfall done, and I erased a lot of the helping lines. Obviously, the original landscape horizontal line is the horizon line is gone. So now I'm figuring out where to put that rock. And compositionally, you have the choice of where to put objects. Sometimes you can be extremely literal in terms of, am I seeing things correctly? Or in this case, because I like the image for its the color values of a very cool water and a very orange, warm sky, I can choose where I want in the scale of my landscape objects. And in the end, most people won't know where the reference comes from. And even if they do, if you make enough edits, it may not look like it, and it'll become an original thing unto itself. So there's the shape of the rock. And you'll see me go over lines. I'm using, for the demo for Zoom, I use a 2B or a B, so you guys can see it on your screens at home. But normally with block-ins, I like to do my initial drawings in a H. So where it looks like I'm pressing harder, it's just that I'm going over the lines twice, and I definitely want to keep my lines crisp and clean. I'm avoiding curved lines, as I've told you guys. It just helps you to figure out how to measure things more accurately. Right, some side rocks on the side here. On the left-hand side as they kind of shoot out around the edge. So this picture was taken on the shore, and these rocks are part of the shore. And now I'm drawing the shadow shapes from separating the dark of the rocks to the green moss that I see. And I'm just hammering away more at these rocks here. I'm glad I sped this up. This would be a lot of waiting. At this point, I'm adding rocks mostly because it's just compositional. It's kind of interesting. I see a diagonal coming from the rocks that I added on the left-hand side. Not the big rock above it, but the little group of rocks on the left-hand side. As you follow them along, they kind of dip horizontally through this big rock and then off to the right, to the lower right-hand side of the canvas. I like the use of negative space. And the negative space here right now, as much as I've drawn, is really going to be that group of water. Some rocks there in the distance. Again, I don't want to cover up too much of that negative space because there's going to be a lot of play of light and colors and values when I get to painting. And so here I go, taping it up. And I will tape this up. I'm going to speed it up even faster here. And speeding it up. Okay, now I'm going to start putting my acrylic down on my plate. I use this plate all the time for painting. That's cadmium red medium hue. That's cadmium yellow light hue. That's an ultramarine blue. And then finally we'll be adding in the cadmium yellow ochre. And last here, I'll be adding in just some student grade titanium white, like acrylic. Normally I like using better paint. I can actually tell a difference between the student grade and the studio grade or the artist grade. And right around studio grade is what I like, money-wise and getting those larger jars. But the white, for some reason, I really like just the cheap white. It's really thin and it doesn't mix too opaquely, so I can do layers with it, which is great for water and the sky and anything that has a gradient that you want to lighten without having to completely lose everything you painted beforehand. So here I go, adding paint into my work. I've changed my setup, as you can see, because I switched cameras at this point. Anyways, here is the darks. I'm going to add in all of my darks first. And I am taking the time to try to measure those darks. How I have my paint laid out on the plate is I try to place it strategically so I remember how much of which colors I use. So I used blue and red to create this, the cadmium red and that ultramarine blue to create a really dark value. It's kind of a charcoal purple, and it works because there's no real black in nature. Even the sky at night is going to be probably a dark purple or dark blues. And it's much more interesting than just slapping black on a canvas, at least for realism and illustrative purposes. And I'm using those two values that I created to put in the dark areas of the painting. The drying time of paint with acrylic is interesting because I used a palette knife. I scooped out these 4 colors, not including white because that one I squeezed out, but even the white. So all of these 5 colors that I put down, they can stay liquid for about an hour, 45 minutes to an hour, and I can use them as long as I don't really destroy that pile of paint. But once I mix them, I can get anywhere from a couple minutes to maybe 5 minutes if I'm lucky with that value, and then I've got to remix it. So I have to have a strategy on my palette there with this limited palette of colors, because memorizing what colors I put into my work is handy, but if I have placed it in an area where I go, okay, yeah, so I added a lot of red and a lot of blue, it would be in a place that makes sense according to this little color chart. So in a sense, I'm making a miniature color chart on my palette here. That's why I like plates better than the little trays that we have at school whenever we get back there. And still just adding in all my dark tones. The reason why we do darks first in drawings and in painting, at least with acrylic paints, is because it sets up your dark values. You don't want to have some areas that are a lot darker than others. All the shadows will have the same amount of absence of light. They'll all have a similar value. And being able to control that right away, it ensures us that the image will really kind of support the light. Because most of the time when you paint, you're really trying to support the light areas and the plays with color and the values that build up to it. So those are the reasons why, one, I've been told, and two, that I've found out it just works the best. Okay, so there I'm starting to mix in the blues. I use the base of that dark. So that's a blue and white with red in there, and I'm trying to figure out where the values are. You can with a printout actually mix a color and bring it close to your reference. Don't touch your reference with the paint, because obviously you'll ruin it and be harder to read. But you use that as a way to measure your paint and see if you're close, and then you can just tap it onto your paper and see if it's the right value. So I started doing the blue and realized there was a lot there. And so instead I was going to key in my highlights. And in this case, the oranges are not the brightest thing on there. If you squint your eyes, the brightest is going to be a very, very light blue. Almost a little bit of teal in there for the sky and the water. And these warms are very light, so I'm keying them in first because I'm gonna paint around them. And I'm not literally going to place them in. I'm placing them in a bit more abstract. I used the cadmium red and the cadmium yellow hues to make a nice orange. And then I'm just adding white to put it in more, to lighten it up more, and then place it on the canvas. I don't have to wait very long, and I can do another layer right on top of it. Acrylic on paper or in thin layers dries extremely quickly. All right, so one of the things I wanted to mention as I'm filling in these yellow areas is I use a cadmium red and a cadmium yellow light hue, H-U-E. And the reason why is that if you get the really good qualities, the studio or even professional qualities, certain brands like Utrecht offer it. Golden is one of the most expensive, and they're awesome, but awesome brands for professionals. They offer like cadmium and cobalt and some other interesting names that refer to minerals that exist in nature. And these minerals are not food. So if you get them in your blood system, they can build up like lead and basically just be poison. So mostly it's going to be like if you accidentally take a sip out of what you think is your water, but it's really your dirty water, and you've been using these cadmiums or cobalts or anything like that, it could make you sick if you took a big enough gulp. So, keep your water on the other side of keep your water or your drink, your soda, whatever you're drinking, on the other side, away from where you dip your paintbrush. That's one. But two, the hues are not harmful, or I should say not as harmful. So the hues are going to be a little bit less expensive. They may not be as vibrant, but they are actually, for acrylic paints, just great. So they're a little bit less expensive than the actual cadmium. So these cadmium hues they're like synthetic, from what I understand. I'll have to do more research and tell you in a different video. But I would make sure, if you're beginning, or if you're not sure where to start, just use the cadmium red hue and the cadmium light hue, and they work great. All right, disclaimer over. I mean, nothing that we're doing here is edible. It's just more a matter of if you make a mistake. And of course, acrylic won't come out of clothing, so, just wear junky clothes or old clothes. Have a set of painting clothes or an apron that you use. All right, so the sky's coming in again from dark to light, upper left-hand corner, and I figured out the two gradients in between. My piles of paint are still wet, and I can just sort of blend in between to make that gradient happen. It's a good way to approach it, because that gradient actually goes all the way into the pink clouds. It gets dark again, and then it'll have a completely separate value over on the right-hand side. And I'm still using a pretty big brush. The size of the brush you use should be a balance of speed and accuracy. If you're working with a tiny brush trying to fill up a piece of paper this big, it will take forever. And you'll have a lot more imperfections in your gradients and large areas that you're filling with a solid or block color. So use the largest brush that you can comfortably. And I'm getting into an area where I'm having to just use the corner of my brush, the edges of my brush, or the side of my brush, and I'm covering all of the paper for my sky. And in general, once you get that block in and your dark values, the background is always a great place to start, because it immediately gives the sense, if you're working with the sky, it immediately gives a sense of what the values are in the distance, and it immediately just gives depth. All right, my camera skipped there for a minute. I started mixing some blues in, which you can see just added white to some of the existing values there. A little bit of red to pull back some of the intensity of that blue. And they're a little bit of yellow, so I can turn it green. And I'm adding in the water. And I'm going to add this water in almost similar to how I would do a watercolor, which would be, I'm just going to place in all the values very lightly, and then I will work areas darker. And this is only because it's water, and I still have white paper showing. I don't really know how light my lightest area of the painting is going to be until I cover up all of that paper. I may go lighter. I probably won't go darker. Considering that acrylics dry a bit darker than they look when they're wet, you want to keep that in mind, that you probably end up going lighter. And with that really thin acrylic, you can actually just almost put it directly on, maybe with a little bit of water, or just smudging it with your finger, and it'll reveal that color behind it, which will have dried within minutes after placing it down on a thin layer. Thick layers will take longer. All right, slightly different value of blues, and I'm building in that background of falling water. I use the same value for that whole wall of water that is on the right-hand side. That water is going to be reflecting the least amount of light, because it's actually facing either a storm, or where, if the sun is setting over on the right, it's facing the left where the twilight is. So it's really the darkest wall of blue. But that blue value also exists underneath other areas. So while I have that value, if I see it work somewhere else, I'll just tap it in or place it in. And like my drawings, you guys, I feel like all of the work I do is fluid, and it's kind of it's flexible, it's elastic. Nothing here I'm doing is a given. I may not be moving things as much now, and I am definitely committed to the drawing that I did. So it's good to take your time with the drawing. And I may make some minor tweaks, but really not too many, because I want to know that I don't want to know where things are, and also realize that things may move. So some of these breaks here are because I try to cut most of them out. I didn't get this one. Or me helping other students through the Zoom, because I have a 3, 4, 5, 7 students who stick around during office hours and they have questions. So I thought I edited this one out, but I'm not spending any more time. So you can just fast forward here until my hand starts moving again. There we go. All right, a little bit more white. And this is going to be, if you squint, wow, that's a pretty light value where the it's interesting watching myself paint and then talking over it. I mean, I remember what I was thinking about it, but I really can see how I could have just, it feels like I hesitate and I could have just put it in faster. But who knows if I was talking. It's hard to talk and paint at the same time. All right, changing the values a little bit, because where the water, some of that water is going to be capturing more light, and so that'll translate to a lighter value. And where the water hits, it shoots out these drops, where the impact is, and it scatters and creates more ripples and water in the atmosphere, which gets caught by light, and so it shoots out horizontally away from the falling water. All right, so I remember thinking, in avoiding too much detail at that point, I really want to fill in all the paper. I'm so close to getting all of that done. And again, here I'm just guessing what the best value is. That area I'm working in right there in the corner is an interesting gradient, because it goes from very light with reflections of the waterfall above it. Visually, where I'm standing, you have this visual highlight that just lights up the water there, and it also just gets very dark, like a vignette where the edges just get darker. Again, when I see a value I like that could go other places, I just use it before I mix it up, because it's either going to dry or it's going to just be really hard to recreate, or just take more time to recreate. And since this is the first layer and things can move because they're fluid, flexible, and elastic, I might as well just put it in. All right, so darker values, I put in that light there, and then I think I tried to darken it. Filling up that area down there. I remember thinking, do I need to lighten that up, because the mist of the water would be lightening up the rock as it gets covered by some of the splash or falling water. And sometimes I did that, sometimes I didn't. Here I remember getting in the last little bits of, and in this case it's a very dark blue, reflecting that rock. Trying not to lose detail of rocks that are closer. And carving a little bit with different values. Doing water is a lot about just very slight and subtle differences in value of the same color. It's a little bit darker, a little bit lighter, a little bit darker, a little bit lighter. And they're all in similar strokes. The strokes are actually relative in length to how far away they are on the perspective plane. And again, with landscapes, as you get close to filling it in, there's going to be slight subtleties where you could just add a different color. It's a little bit warmer. Try adding that yellow ochre or the red, or a little bit to make it warmer. It's a little bit cooler. Maybe you add a little bit of white or a yellow to that blue to make it a green or just a lighter value. And it's all subtle, and you can add it as you see it. With painting, it's never final. You can always do another layer. And with acrylics, you can do another layer in like minutes. All right, so again, just adding a little bit more blues and reds to darken that green. It's kind of a dark sap green there that I'm adding in, where it's still green, but it's really in the shadows, or it's right on the edge of that gradient where it's dark. And this moss is covering everything, because when that water falls, it is prime for just moss to grow everywhere. And I'm getting to the point where the whole thing is covered, and I will start going back into details. So I think, the first layer, a lot of you would end right here. And what I suggest is just take another 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and use your eraser if you're just doing a sketch in graphite, or if you're doing a pen, pen and ink drawing, just use the white jelly roll pen and just pull out the highlights. And just take a few extra moments while this image is in your mind. You've already created a mental image as well as a literal image that you've painted or drawn. But just take that time and just find ways to make it sing a bit more, make it pop a bit more. Don't sell yourself short and just say it's done and turn it in, because other people may look at it and love it, or you may look at it a little bit later and go, wow, that wasn't too bad. Maybe I should have put a little bit more work into it. And especially those of you who love your work, don't be too eager to put down your paintbrush unless your parents are yelling at you. Take just a couple more minutes and ask, what can I do? What am I missing? You can use a mirror, take a picture of it and flip it so that you can see the mirror image. That'll reveal a lot of different things in your image about where things can be corrected or fixed. At this point I'm looking at it and I'm realizing that the waters on the right-hand side could be a lot brighter. The sky could be a lot brighter. There's a shadow under the cloud that's much, much darker. And pretty soon here, the video is going to cut out because the camera, I'm just having issues with this camera. As I'm editing it today, I think I've fixed it, but we'll see. It's just a great camera to use. It's so convenient, so I'm really trying to get rid of that learning curve. All right, lowering the horizon a bit. Looking at the image, trying to figure out things, where they go. All right, thanks for watching, guys. Your assignments will be due Friday, I think at 2 p.m. I said, right? Or was it? Anyways, it's posted on the website. So go by whatever I posted, not what I say here. And then Friday we'll do a review. And maybe we'll take a look at something different. And a lot of time here while we're in quarantine is going to be spent looking at landscapes. We'll be doing some still lifes, and we'll be doing portrait work. Some figurative work too. It's the end of the year. The 5th graders are far ahead enough so we can all work on figurative work. All right, value shifts are going in here. Subtleties in the water. What you don't see that I am going to add in the next layer, because the first layer is officially done, I'm just adding little things to it, in which I don't record because the camera goes off, is that I bump the clouds, the darkness around the red, and I really key up more highlights on the right hand side, and I play more with thin layers. In some cases I just added like a dot of blue. Anyways, guys, thanks for watching.